Hello, welcome to another episode of Prehistory in the Dark. I am your host, Darkness the Curse. And before we begin, as always, thank you so much to my generous patrons and my channel members from over at our sister channel, History in the Dark. You are the reason why this content remains on the big screen, I guess, because usually I don't do videos like this, but I just did one a few days ago, discussing briefly how I feel about Jurassic Park in general and how it relates to paleontology, and, what it means to me and what it did for paleontology. Since then, I've gotten a few people asking me what I thought about the new Jurassic Park movie, Jurassic World Dominion. And this is going to be a regular thing where I talk about media. I don't want you guys to think that that's the case, because that's not really what I do here, or want to do with this channel. I want to talk about the actual facts, the actual science about paleontology and the history of life on the planet, and things of that nature. Basically, just prehistory in general, things that happened before human history. If you want human history, go over to History in the Dark, where I've been stonewalled into doing mostly trains, but it's okay. The point is, I know what I do and I know what I want to do, but because I've gotten so many people asking my opinion on this subject, I decided that I was going to do a video regarding my honest, legitimate thoughts about Dominion. Jurassic Park, the original, is my favorite movie ever, period, end of story. I've watched every single movie in the series, I've played a ton of the video games, I've absorbed some of the multimedia that isn't even canon. Dinosaurs in general are one of my big things, and I do love it as a series and know a great deal about it. So I have legitimate thoughts, of course, about Dominion, which so far has gotten a very, very Ghostbusters Afterlife opinion on it, where critics absolutely are slamming the movie, calling it terrible and horrible and basically unwatchable. But the audience score is actually pretty high, and as it stands, the audience score is actually higher than the original Jurassic World. So people who aren't professional movie critics, who aren't paid to criticize stuff because that's what they do, seem to genuinely like it. Regular people who sit down and watch the movie seem to be really enjoying it. Now, I have also taken the time to examine some of the opinions of other Jurassic Park fans. Someone that I follow on YouTube is named Clayton Fioriti, and he is probably a bigger Jurassic Park fan than me, and that's not something I get to say very often. He actually has two channels, but his big one is literally all about Jurassic Park, extended media of Jurassic Park, reviews of the books, talking about fan theories, examining weird things about the franchise. I learned a ton that I didn't even know from him, and I wanted to know what he thought too, as someone I respect as a fellow fan of this franchise. He was very mixed on the movie, and to a certain extent I agree with him. I don't think I disliked it quite as much as he did, but I definitely understand where he's coming from. So from the get-go, I want to talk about good points and things that I genuinely liked about the movie. The fact that the original cast is back is great. And the acting in general, for the most part, I consider actually quite good. Chris Pratt, Bryce Dallas Howard are always phenomenal in whatever they're in, and they are great in the roles of Owen and Claire, no problem there. The original cast, for the most part, seem to fall back into their roles like an old pair of shoes. Sam Neill as Alan Grant is always wonderful to see. It's easily my favorite role he's ever played, and he does a good job of handling an aged, worn-out Alan Grant, which is kind of how they portray him here. He's just kind of tired, and who can blame him? Now dinosaurs are on the mainland, and he's like, oh, good gravy. And it's actually established that he's trying to fund his digging, because he still wants to dig as a paleontologist, through offering his dig sites as almost a historical tourist attraction, where people come to see how we used to look at dinosaurs. And that's actually quite clever, and brilliant, in fact. It's almost like a reference to how we handle heritage history in general when it comes to stuff. In the Jurassic Park universe, the notion of digging up fossils is a little obsolete when dinosaurs are literally walking around the entire planet at this point. But since straight-up private sponsors have dried up, he's had to charge people admission to see the work he does, but it's proven to work. Jeff Goldblum as Ian Malcolm is of course always a treat, though I thought he was a little all over the place in Malcolm's portrayal. In some scenes, he's absolutely top-notch. The initial speech scene he gives, and his intellectual duel with Lewis Dodgson was phenomenal, but sometimes for comedic value it felt like they made Malcolm seem a little socially awkward, and I would never really call Malcolm socially awkward. He's arrogant and pretentious and full of himself, but he's not awkward. If anything, he's very charismatic, and it didn't seem like he was always like that in every single scene. Laura Dern is actually the golden child of this movie as far as I'm concerned. I've always found her a really underrated actress in general. Her role as Ellie Sattler was easily her most famous, and she's kind of an underappreciated scream queen in that regard, especially regarding the horror elements of the original Jurassic Park. Laura Dern was phenomenal back as Ellie in this movie. She was absolutely fantastic. No complaints with her. It's clear that with the script they wanted to give Ellie a more dominant role. Even though she had a pretty good role in the original movie, she's been sidelined since then, only having light involvement in Jurassic Park 3. Now that she's back, actually dealing with dinosaurs again, she's actually a very major character and pretty much the catalyst for why the original 3 gets involved with the events of this movie. Whereas Grant is pretty much content with his digging, and Malcolm's kind of being a corporate spy at the moment. Which, to me, is kind of weird for Malcolm, but also kind of makes sense at the same time. It's one of those things. Visual effects are phenomenal and cinematography is great. There's no complaints there. Colin Trevorrow has always been very good when it comes to set pieces, display, and the CGI. Despite people always complaining about CGI, I don't know what they're talking about, because CGI is great in Dominion. It really is. In fact, I don't think the CGI has ever truly been bad in any Jurassic Park movie. Not one time. JP3 has its weaknesses, but especially for 2001, its CGI was on point. And Dominion is no exception, especially considering the variety of dinosaurs we have in the movie. And that's actually one of the best things about it, is that if you're a big dinosaur fan and want to see a ton of different dinosaurs in the movie, well, they made it a point to try to put in a large variety of creatures in the movie. Now, the downside of that, in my opinion, is that many of these animals don't have that much screen time, but they are there. The Carnotaurus Allosaurus, they show up, Triceratops, Ankylosaurs, Apatosaurs, all these animals do appear. The Rex, Raptors, as well as new animals that have not actually appeared in a movie before, such as the Pyroraptor, which has feathers, which is a new thing. The Therizinosaurus, which was a phenomenally shot scene, by the way, one of the best parts of the movie. The Dilophosaurs make a return, and there is, of course, the Giganotosaurus, which is kind of the big bad dinosaur of the movie. The Rex is of course there, but the big draw here is that the Giganotosaurus was, and in reality is, technically a little bit bigger than a T-Rex. The film portrays it in a light where it is much stronger than a Rex, and putting these two apex predators together would lead to them eventually fighting and one of them killing the other. In the prequel setup for this movie, it reveals that the original Rex was actually killed in her past life by a Giganotosaurus. The DNA they used to clone Rexy is from that original Rex. The implication, I always thought, was that Rexy actually has some memories of her previous existence back in the Cretaceous period, and recognizes what a Giganotosaurus is, and the fact that it killed her. But this really isn't followed up on in the movie. And this is where I'm going to get into some negatives, because I do feel like the movie, I enjoyed it. I did. I genuinely came out of the theater, and I was like, that was a good movie. I liked it. But it wasn't as good as I was hoping. As the closure to the second trilogy, as what is the current cap on this 6-film long franchise, I felt like there were a lot of things that could have been done differently. For one thing, they got really, really bold with how they handled the movie overall. Because the cast, between Owen and Claire and the original trio, they don't meet until probably the last half hour of the film. Up until that point, yeah, they're headed to the same area for different reasons, but the film jumps back and forth between them and effectively tells their two stories at the same time while each of them is going on. It's kind of like watching two completely different movies that are just taking place at the same time. This is an interesting idea that doesn't usually happen in movies, and when it does, it usually isn't very good. It definitely weakens the flow of the film, I feel. sometimes it can be very erratic where you get narrative whiplash jumping back and forth so much. Now, it isn't necessarily something that is going to hamper the experience to a significant degree, but there were times where I was like, oh right, I forgot that was happening. It's a very difficult way of telling a narrative, and I actually want to commend the editing of the film for doing it as well as it turned out, because in all actuality, I feel that this movie has no business being as good as it is because of this. There were so many ways that this could have gone hideously wrong, and it actually turned out to be a watchable, genuinely enjoyable experience, when again, it probably shouldn't have. Now, like I said, many of the dinosaurs in the film do not appear very often. There are many great sequences, but they tend to jump around very quickly, dealing with interactions with brand new dinosaurs. The Atrociraptor sequence is great, but once you're out of that area, you never see them again. Same thing can be said for the Pyroraptor, which shows up, has a really awesome underwater sequence, and then never appears again. The Therizinosaurus actually does show up again, which I was genuinely shocked by, because like the other two, I figured it would show up, be there for a cool sequence, and then never be seen again. And I don't have a problem with this in the sense of showing as many dinosaurs as possible, because I understand they wanted to do that, but I feel like a big part of the previous Jurassic Park movies is establishing a singular focus when it comes to a dinosaur. Many of the dinosaurs in the original movies had multiple scenes they were in. The Brachiosaurs, for example, show up at least twice in the first film. The Velociraptors are there consistently for pretty much the entire closing arc. Rexy shows up 3 times. In this movie, most of the dinosaurs only have one scene, and since there's so many, it can be kind of annoying not seeing any of them again after their initial setup. Quetzalcoatlus was the one that disappointed me, because I'd been waiting so long to see Quetzalcoatlus, because it is the largest living thing that ever flew, by a considerable margin. They were as big as giraffes, and they flew, which is nuts. And seeing them on that scale attacking a plane was really cool, but that's all the Quetzie does. Then it's just kind of gone. Blue also doesn't really do anything in this film. Beyond having a baby, the plot is about getting that baby back. Blue does not go with Owen and Claire to get the baby because, well, to be fair, I would love a scene where Owen tries to talk Blue through airport security, trying to convince them that it's totally safe to bring a raptor on board an international flight, but that is not what happened. They just kind of leave Blue behind because what are they going to do? But what really made me mad was kind of the lack of a real rivalry between Rexy and this giganotosaurus. The Giga appears, but there's no real build-up to it. And even the scene where the Giga's kind of pursuing the cast, it seems really lazy about the whole thing. Like, I felt like the Giga had plenty of opportunities to eat at least one of them, and it's just like, yeah, I'm here. It's almost the polar opposite of the Spinosaurus from JP3. That thing ripped apart everything, and it never stopped. It was brutal, insane, to an overwhelming degree. Rexy in the first film was a nice medium where she acted like an animal, but still was a real threat. The Giga just seems so dull in comparison in its portrayal. Yeah, it's clearly dangerous, but it doesn't really care if you get away. And then the fight between the T-Rex and the Giga was honestly kind of disappointing. And the reason I say that is because my whole thing here is that, look, and follow me on this, how many times has the T-Rex in this series gotten into a fight, and it didn't really win, in the traditional sense? Rexy in particular has been involved in 2 different altercations during the course of this series. 3 if you count the 2 raptors from the first movie, but she was obviously going to win that, so fair. And the Rex in JP3 is given a pass because apparently it was a juvenile, and let's be fair, the Spinosaurus was completely insane in that movie. But Rexy fought the Indominus, and struggled at first, and it was only through the intervention of Blue that the Indominus didn't win. Now, I understood that because not only was that fight just awesome, it's the best fight in the series, period, as far as I'm concerned, but the Indominus was a genetic hybrid. It was designed for combat. It was designed to be brutal and unstoppable. It was that way by design, so it being incredibly difficult to beat, I totally follow. But the Giga is not like that. The Giga was a real animal, and it's supposed to be based on that real animal. Not only did we see that Rexy actually died to one in her past life, which I thought was going to follow into Rexy having some memories of that life and therefore remembering how dangerous Gigas can be and how to fight one, but also, if we really want to base this on the previous paleontological record, a Giga, despite being larger than a Rex, probably would not actually win a fight against a Rex. Gigas were not that much bigger than T-Rexes, and the big difference was that Gigas were very narrow, very lean, very built for speed, and strike and run tactics based on their teeth. They were huge, yes, but their prey was some of the largest sauropods that ever walked the planet. These creatures did not have to overpower a sauropod to actually kill them. All they had to do was get in close to the herd, bite one, and wait. And their size was only because they could get that big for self-defense and the fact that their food source was incredibly filling. Sauropods were massive. They had a lot of meat on their bones. But a Rex had to actually work really hard to get their food. Their prey was Triceratops, and Triceratops had many ways of fighting back that involved goring them with their horns. Rexes may have been a little smaller, but they were built very muscular, very bulky, very much built for fighting. A Rex could easily hold their own against a Giga, probably even kill one. I mean, it obviously depends on a lot of factors, and I don't want to assume anything, but here's my thing. Rexy in particular, outside of the initial movie, it always feels like she has to have some kind of outside intervention to win her fights, and that's kind of undermining her as a character. She's one of the most recognizable dinosaurs in the series, and one of the most popular. I gave it a pass in the Indominus fight because, again, awesome, and B, genetic hybrid. But this is the Giga that she's fought once before. As someone who watched the prequel, which was not in the theatrical release, by the way, and I feel like it should have been, I desperately hoped to watch Rexy just rip into the Giga. I wanted so much to see her just go to town and actually overpower a foe on her own. But that's not what happened at all. Rexy didn't die this time because the cast distracted the Giga. And then Rexy only beat the Giga because the Therizinosaurus showed up, and she tackled the Giga into the Therizinosaur's massive claws. Now, that was cool and awesome, and I thought it was great, but I also felt really disappointed that Rexy didn't just beat the Giga on her own. Like, I expected the fight to be tough for her, but I didn't want to see her literally get knocked out again and have to get back up, having only the time to do so because someone helped her. Like, for once, just let Rexy kill something by herself, is all I'm trying to say. And I didn't feel like the original cast and Owen and Claire really blended very well. You could tell there was a big difference in eras here. I liked a lot of the interaction between Ellie and Claire, that was good, but it almost felt like Alan Grant didn't even need to be in the movie. Like, I love Sam Neill, but it didn't seem like Alan really had much to do. He didn't even have that many exchanges with Owen, and I feel like they should have a lot to friggin' talk about, given the fact that Owen trained raptors, and that's been Alan's passion species to study for years. And it's true, Alan totally mentions it, he knows who Owen is, but they don't really go into any detail about it, and I just feel like that was a wasted opportunity. I also kind of wish that Ian Malcolm had gone into more detail about his family life, like whatever happened between him and Sarah Harding. That relationship was a pivotal point of The Lost World, and he doesn't say that they aren't together. He doesn't say that they are. He does mention that he has a total of 5 kids now, which means that at least one of those could be him and Sarah's, but we don't know. There's a lot of mystery left there, and I was kind of disappointed we just didn't get concrete, like, just say it. Just say it, coward. That's all I'm trying to say. The villain issue of this movie is a little weird, because there's technically 3 villains, but they're all involved with Dodgson. And Dodgson is the main villain, but the 2 under him are like a hit woman who uses dinosaurs, which is really weird, by the way, and the dude who kidnaps Maisie and Beta. Those first 2 don't really mean much initially because they're only part of the middle act, where the big bad is Dodgson. And that's fine, because Dodgson was the main villain of the books at the end of the day. He was the one that caused the downfall of the original Jurassic Park, and he was much more heavily involved in the book, The Lost World, which differs heavily from the script that was used in the Lost World movie. And while I think Dodgson was portrayed in a really interesting way here, I also think it deeply clashes with the way he was in the books. Dodgson in the book was kind of a sociopath. He was heavily involved in corporate espionage and had really no moral qualms about who got in his way. He even tried to murder Sarah Harding in the book. But this Dodgson, not only is he the CEO of Biosyn in this movie, which he was not actually in charge of Biosyn in the books, he just worked for them, but he's portrayed very bluntly as an allegory for CEOs of big tech companies. I mean, his base of operations even has a literal hyperloop that he literally calls, so no restraint on the Elon Musk references here. And he comes across as kind of a Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg type deal, where he has this vision for the future, but he doesn't seem to understand morals involved here. The thing that bothers me about this portrayal of Dodgson, though, is that while that sounds the same, it isn't. Book Dodgson knew what morals were, he just didn't care about them because he was... This Dodgson isn't inherently evil in his own mind. Like, he just doesn't really mentally acknowledge the fact that people have emotions. He thinks nothing can be done without obvious cost, so he just lets things be. He almost comes across as socially awkward in that way. In fact, many cases he is very, very, very socially awkward. Which, again, was not the way Dodgson was in the books. Dodgson in the book was actually very articulate and manipulative. This Dodgson is very smart, but he's not really very manipulative. Like, he just doesn't tell people stuff, and thinks he has everything figured out, when he obviously doesn't, but it's only because of his own interpersonal awkwardness, not because he's inherently evil and intentionally doing things that are bad. He just justifies them in his own head. I was surprised at the portrayal of Henry Wu here, because Dr. Wu in the books was actually a pretty good guy who did something a little dumb. But it seemed like the last two Jurassic World movies were leading up Wu to be kind of an evil scientist. Now, I was kind of down for that, to be honest, but Dominion did a complete 180 here, and shows off a Wu who's desperate to redeem himself by using his knowledge of DNA sequencing to actually try to help humanity. He needs Maisie to do it, because as it turns out, Maisie is not a test tube clone of her mother. She was genuinely born, and though she was genetically identical to her mom, that was only because it was the only way her mom could have a baby. Her mom loved her just like any mother would, and the reason her mother died was because of a genetic illness. Maisie's mother was a scientist and was able to alter Maisie's genetic code after she'd already been born to remove the illness. This is something that Dr. Wu desperately wants to figure out, because not only is there a whole locust plague going on that's the result of Biosyn's idiocy, but it could lead to other breakthroughs with other genetic diseases if science figures out how to correct them. He also wants Beta because Beta is a control. Beta is also effectively an asexual clone of her mother, Blue. By comparing Beta's own altered genes to Maisie's altered ones, Wu might be able to figure out what Maisie's mother did exactly so he can redeem himself and actually save lives for once. It's actually kind of a sweet way to go about it, even though literally nobody trusts Dr. Wu, but it turns out he is being genuine, and that's great and all. But it just kind of came out of nowhere, if you ask me, because again, up until that point, Dr. Wu was like, yes, I will create genetic abominations that will rise up and be glorious. And now it's like, I really shouldn't have done that. And it's like, okay, I believe you, but when did you decide that what you were doing was bad? How many people have died, Dr. Wu? Because it was a lot! Overall, though, I did enjoy the movie. I liked seeing the original cast. I liked seeing the latest trilogy concluded. The presence of a ton of dinosaurs is always a feast for the eyes, and like I said, the effects are good, some of the set pieces are phenomenal, and I did come out of the movie genuinely enjoying what I had seen. I just wish it would have been a little bit better. I wish there would have been more things done to it. It almost felt like it should have been longer, which is a weird thing to say, because usually I don't like movies that are that long, but it really needed to be a little longer to flesh things out a bit. Maybe make some of the sequences a bit better, maybe give some of the other dinosaurs more staying power. I have heard tell that there might be an extended cut released at some point, but that is just a rumor. If it's true, I would love to see it, perhaps make the film a little bit better than it already is. And as far as the future of the series, well, as much as I love Jurassic Park and would love to see more, right now I'm kind of the opinion that we should give it a break for a while. I don't want them to rush out some cash grab, because now that dinosaurs are everywhere, there's no heavy writing that has to be done to get somebody on an island. You could literally write about anything. Compies invading a Walmart, for goodness sakes. Like, we could do that. It's totally a thing that could happen. But I don't want it to devolve into just whatever, because I want a good story on top of it. Dominion has a story. It has a lot of good stuff in it, and I would say that if you've been on the fence about seeing it, that you should definitely give it a chance. I am just going to tell you up front that it's not as good as I wanted it to be, but it is good. So, take that for what you will. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.